Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LTA finals and semifinals overview and analysis video. This is the big one. This is the final domestic video that we are posting about any of the regions that we cover on this channel. We are done with the LEC, we are done with the LCK, we are done with the LPL. It is finally time to wrap everything up with our LTA semifinals and finals overview and analysis video. I hope you guys are excited. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you expect from these two series? Did they live up to your expectations, or were you perhaps surprised by the outcomes? I'm very curious to know where you guys land on these teams, these three teams that we're going to talk about here today. I know obviously I've been pretty vocal about my thoughts throughout a lot of this tournament and, just online in general about where these teams stand, but it's exciting to see whether or not they live up to those expectations, or perhaps whether or not I am maybe surprised by the outcomes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. If you are new here or did not watch any of the previous other region videos that we've done where we've included the finals alongside another series, what we're going to do is do that series by series breakdown. At least for the first one, we're just going to cover the entirety of the semifinals in one go, and then once we do get into the finals, we're going to break everything down game by game and talk about it specifically there. I hope that makes the most sense. It certainly did make the most sense in my brain when we talked about it. So without further ado, let's get into things. You should know that means that, we're going series by series. We're talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving either a player of the series or, of course, a player of the game for each individual series and game that we cover. We'll be doing the same with dud of the series / dud of the game, and then at the end of the video, the only thing left to preview is how these three teams are projecting going into the World Championships. No more domestic play, no more tournaments to cover, no more games for these teams before they get to the Swiss stage of Worlds. So we'll kind of talk about that a bit at the end, but of course, most of today will be spent talking about the games themselves. So let's get into the semifinals, our first series in today's video, and one that honestly I was super excited to talk about because I had kind of a controversial take. I really do think that one of these teams is pretty solid, and I think the other one of these teams is a bit overrated at the moment in terms of what their skill level is at. And fortunately for me, that did end up actually paying off in terms of the result here. It's going to be Vivo Stars taking on 100 Thieves, the #1 seed, of course, from the south, taking on the #2 seed from the north. And Vivo Stars is going to pick up the 3-1 series victory. They are going to handily beat 100 Thieves, be the better team here today, take a lot of what 100 Thieves does at a high level, kind of turn it on its head and kind of push it back on them, and really just kind of be better. There's not really a ton I can talk about in terms of, oh, draft gap or individual lane gap in one place or another. This was mostly just kind of VKS allowing 100 Thieves to do all the things they're really good at and just outplaying them, being better than them anyways, which I think is even more impressive in terms of their kind of win here. And for 100 Thieves, I'm not surprised that this team is not good enough to beat the #1 team from the LTA South. I think they have a ton of flaws individually in terms of the way they play out lane matchups and the way that they set things up for the rest of their own team, but also, their coordination play is just not very good. Their macro is just not very good. It hasn't been good all year long. Generally, the way that they win games is through Quid or River or FBI being able to get super fed in the mid game and then just kind of taking over in team fights. When they're not able to do that, when a team like Vivo Stars is able to kind of consistently play against them and be able to push up, aggressively in a lot of these laning phases, take more aggressive matchups and be able to play those out because they have the hands to do it, all of a sudden 100 Thieves' game plan kind of crumbles around them and they just don't really have the firepower to keep going. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is super difficult, I think, for this one. There are 3 players on the team that I think were absolutely excellent here today. Miru was very good, and he is kind of the main character of Vivo Stars, and let's be frank, he was just better than Quid in this series, especially as things kind of went down to the stretch. Of course, Quid had a very good game #3 on the Silas, but his Yone, his signature champion in game #4, was just not very good. He got completely outplayed with Miru on the rise and with Quid on the Yone, but I really think this was a bot lane series, and whichever, side you want to give that to, whether you want to give player of the series to Morteus or whether you want to give it to Trimby, I think it should go to one of those two, but honestly, I think Trimby was more valuable and more important in this series. I think specifically on the Lulu in game #4, which was absolutely mammoth towards VKS's chances to win this series consistently. Trimby is a great player. He's always been a player that I think has been a bit underrated by the community as a whole, at least going back to the past couple of years. I know there was some times on Rogue where I wasn't as into Trimby. I think he's a phenomenal laner. That's really what Trimby does at a super high level. He was always the best enchanter player in Europe in terms of the supports that were near the top of the standings, and I think that there were a lot of times that from a macro perspective, he was a top 1 or a top 2 support in the LEC in Europe, and he's carried a lot of that over here to VKS in terms of how much he's been able to push this team into a good spot. He can do it on things like Nico and Nautilus that I think are pretty open in terms of the way they play. You know, Nico being more of a playmaker, Nautilus obviously your stock standard engaged tank support, but it really is those, you know, enchanters. It's things like Milio, which may have not worked out as much in game 3, but the Lulu in game number 4 that really pushed Trimby over the top and really encapsulate, I think, why he is so good for this team, because he really is awesome at those kinds of picks, and he's going to thrive in a meta that does kind of encourage those types of champions. And so for me, you know, Trimby's effect on the game as a whole, his ability to micromanage everything that was happening in game 4, and even the damage he was able to put out at times in that game on the Lulu and even on the Nico in game number 1, really impressive stuff. Having a, you know, legit, like, world-class kind of support, maybe not world-class, like he's not top 10 in the world, but he's better than Ayla on the other side of this, right? He would be a top 1 or a top 2 support in North America in terms of the way that things break down. Like, he's up there with players like Vulcan and Core JJ. I don't know why I blinked on his name in terms of where his talent level is at. To have a player like that here for an LTA South team, I think is very, very much a boon rather than a bane. And then for Morteus, like, this is a guy I've been kind of singing the praises of ever since I watched the tape for VKS going into this tournament. I wasn't super vocal about Morteus on the channel. It was much more kind of centered around Miru and on Trimby, who I thought were excellent, but I know I had a lot of conversations off of the channel and even on social media like Twitter about how good Morteus is and about how important he is towards what VKS want to do. I think he was excellent in terms of his positioning in this series. He is basically the perfect follow-up AD carry to make sure that everything goes as stable as possible. That he was excellent here as well. Miru, like I said, completely outplayed Quid in the mid lane, especially in game number 4 when he was on the Rise and Quid was on the Yone, but Quid also won things like Galio and Aurora, just failing to find the same kind of map impact that Miru was on Ahri and on Talia. I understand why the broadcast ended up giving him player of the series, because he is kind of the main character of VKS. I just don't think he had that same kind of impact on this series for me. I think he was good, but I think he's getting that mostly because of his reputation rather than the actual gameplay. I certainly think bot lane was the most relevant part of VKS's win, but Miru is excellent. This is a guy who absolutely would thrive in North America. Like, he's not all that dissimilar to someone like Quid on the other side of this matchup, and Miru, quite frankly, was better in this series. So very big win there for VKS. And then topside, all they need to do is stabilize. Desamis, Boal, like, they're good players, but they're not superstars, and they don't really need to be. They have really good players on this team, like Miru, Trimby, Morteus, I think can be a primary carry option. If they're just stable enough, if you can get Desamis on these early game pathers, things like Pantheon, things like Trundle, things like Jarvan, that have so many engage tools that allow for this setup for everybody else on the team, all of a sudden things get easier, and Boal, especially in the top lane, he doesn't need to dominate lane. He doesn't need to be the kind of guy that's out there up 50 CS. It's pretty difficult to be able to do that consistently in the top lane, even if you're one of the best players in the world. But if he's going to pick things like Aatrox and Sion and stabilize even things like Cho'Gath in game number 3, you know, that's a positive. That's exactly what you want to see. Allow the stars on this team to work and let everyone else work towards that goal in the same way. VKS was solid here, and they did everything they were supposed to. For 100 Thieves on the other side, this is the kind of expected outcome. Quite frankly, this team does have a ceiling, and while I did like the matchup for 100 Thieves into VKS, that was mostly because VKS does rely a ton on mid lane, and I was just worried that Miru was not going to be able to overcome someone like Quid, who I think is a great player individually. I thought he was going to be able to generate those leads on his own in the mid lane, but that, quite frankly, just did not happen in this series. Quid was not good enough. Don't let his KDA lie to you. He got so much of that in game 3 on the Sylas. This guy was genuinely not good in this series, and he made a ton of mistakes. Mechanically, I think in terms of his execution, he was missing ults left and right in game number 4 on the Yone, and I get it, it's one game, and he was at least a little bit better, I would say, in the other games of this series, but he certainly wasn't the Quid that I think 100 Thieves need him to be, which is this primary carry option that can actively change the trajectory of the entire game. Quid was not that in this series, and I think when he is not that, very similar to how if Miru can't carry, you know, VKS can't win, if Quid can't carry, 100 Thieves can't win against basically anybody in the world, which is definitely a bit of a problem. Quid was very much in the running for dud of the series for me here, but I ended up landing on River. I think it should go to one of the jungle mid duo. River was just greedy. Like, there's really not much else to say. This guy was constantly looking for plays that were not properly set up and that were not good plays. Like, he was just kind of diving in and hoping things worked out. And I just don't really like that play style, especially on things like Wukong and Xin Zhao. He had his own signature champion in the Jarvan taken away from him in game number 1 and didn't really get the chance to ever rebound in this series. Desamis, while he wasn't unbelievable, was certainly a better facilitator in this series than someone like River was. Douglas KDA looks worse, but honestly, his laning was fine. He just couldn't really do anything in the back half of these games. The Akali in Game 4 really was not the problem, despite maybe what KDA would indicate, you kind of figuring out. And FBI and Ayla, again, their KDAs are fine, but I think Morteus and Trimby were certainly better on the other side with, worse KDAs. You have a player in Trimby who went 5 and 15, whereas Ayla went 4 and 11. And you're like, oh my god, Ayla was, better than Trimby. That's just not there on tape here. Ayla was much more passive, and, they just weren't as aggressive. And that's the biggest problem with FBI and Ayla, is they're really not killers. They're not game breakers. You kind of need River and Quid to be able to establish a lot of that tempo to get the best out of this bot lane. And right now, that just isn't going to happen unless you are able to completely skill gap the mid jungle on the other side. So for 100 Thieves, I'm not going to say an expected loss because this is still an upset for them, but certainly not one I'm surprised by. And nobody should really be surprised that VKS is a finals caliber team. This team was genuinely great in the LTA South. Their roster is, really constructed well, I would say. They have two genuinely star players in Miru and Trimby, who I think are, elite level LTA South kind of players. And then Morteus, I think, is genuinely just a good AD carry. If Boal and Tasamis on the top side of the map can just be stable like they were in this series, I'm not saying they can go up against FlyQuest, but they more than deserve their spot as the number 2 team in the LTA, and a team that genuinely will be kind of scary to go up against if you're a Western team at Worlds. But then, now that we've wrapped up the semifinals, it's time to move on to the series you are all here for, and it is your LTA finals. And with the announcement of both the LCS and the CB LOL coming back for 2026, it is your one and only LTA finals of all time. A gigantic series. Whoever wins this will be the only official LTA champion in the history of the league. So certainly a lot on the line for the number 1 team from the LTA North in FlyQuest, taking on the number 1 seed from the LTA South and Vivo Keydstars. Obviously, not only that being on the line, because it's kind of funny to talk about it being the only LTA championship of all time, but also number 1 seed going to Worlds is on the line. Being the best team in the LTA, the bragging rights of that is on the line. You want to win your region. You want to be that number 1 seed going to Worlds. You want to prove to everybody that you are the best team in the league. FlyQuest was able to do that against expectation last year when they took down Team Liquid, and they were not considered to be the best team in North America at the time. They turned out, obviously, to be the best team last year, making it to the quarterfinals of Worlds and taking Gen G to 5 games. But this is the year that FlyQuest really asserts their dominance on North America. This is the year where this roster proves that they could be the best in North American history if they can start to live up to their own expectations. And that is truly what this series is all about. They've already taken on VKS in the upper bracket finals, if you will, however you want to call it, that number 1 seed matchup earlier on in the tournament, and they slaughtered them 3-0. It wasn't even particularly close. They beat them in every aspect of the game. And if they come out and play like that in this series, it's not going to be close. It's not going to be difficult. They are going to be able to take this series easily. However, I think Vivo Keydstars is a good team, and there are avenues, I think, for them to be able to take a matchup like this. Like I talked about in the matchup against 100 Thieves, the big thing for VKS is, can mid lane get ahead? Can you start to generate resources through the middle of the map and translate that into bot lane later on in the game for these 5v5 team fights? Well, honestly, I don't hate the matchup for that. While I think it's hard because jungle is never going to be in a good spot, and bot lane probably not in the position to take over late, because unless you're just going neutral, and even then neutral is kind of hard against Maso and Busio, like you're not going to be winning on the bottom side of the map. But Miru isn't all that bad. Like, Quad is a good player, but I think he is, I've said this all year, kind of the weak link of FlyQuest in terms of being able to take advantage of his bad map movements and his roaming potential. Like, if Miru can actually generate leads, there is an avenue for VKS to be able to win a series like this, or at least a game in a series like this. It's just so astronomically difficult because you're basically outskilled everywhere. Even if I'm talking about mid lane, I don't think Miru is better than Quad. Like, I don't think he's a better player hands-wise than Quad is. And if they just play a normal 1v1 matchup in the mid lane, I would imagine that at worst it goes neutral. And, at the absolute best for Fly, it ends up with Quad getting a massive lead because he did that the last time these two teams played. Like I said, bot lane is certainly not in favor of them, especially in the 2v2. Top lane is certainly not in favor of them. Last time they had to play against Gakgos. This time Bwipo is back in the starting lineup, coming back from his suspension. He's going to be an even harder challenge to overcome, and you already got 3-0'd. Inspired is the best player in the West, and he's going up against likely one of the weak links of VKS and Desamis. promise on the other side. This is not a good matchup for Vivo Stars. I just hope that they can win a game. I hope they can prove that they're competitive. I hope that they can actually keep up with a team like Fly. But for Fly, they want to come out here and dominate this series. If they get yet another 3-0, they're walking into Worlds with the most amount of confidence that a North American team has in a very, very long time. So a big series for both of these teams, but for entirely different reasons. Fly are obviously massive favorites, but are they even going to drop a game? That is the question. Well, the only way to know is to go game by game, and that means starting off with game number 1. So let's get into it. The winner of game number 1 was FlyQuest. They are going to take game number 1. They're going to go up in this series 1-0. And honestly, after game number 1, I don't really have a ton of hopes that this series is going to be particularly competitive between these two teams because this was a massacre once again from Fly. They come off of a dominant performance against VKS in the previous series to now obliterating them. Again, even after the confidence builder that Vivo Stars just underwent beating 100 Thieves 3-1, they can't even put up a fight in this game, quite frankly, against Fly, who was just ahead in every single aspect. It really does feel like these two teams are 3 or more tiers away from each other. Like, it really, like, I hate to just kind of, you know, shove the point down people's throats, but like after this game number 1, it's just really hard to imagine a world where VKS can even try and stay relevant in a series like this. I hope that I'm wrong, but if this is how game number 1 is going and you already got obliterated in 3 games against the same exact team less than, 2 weeks ago, it's not looking good. Like, there's not really a lot of positivity, I think, in the minds of VKS fans right now. They're happy they're here, might be as far as they go, but for FlyQuest fans, this is exactly what they were looking for. They want to see this team be as dominant and as strong as they possibly can be in this finals to prove that they are not just good enough to dominate North America and dominate the Americas in general. We already know that that is the case when it comes to this roster and these players individually. The question is, can this team dominate like we want them to at the world stage on the international level? And at least with performances like this, it's really hard to believe that that is not going to be the case. So let's get in and talk about it. Player of the game for me here in game number 1 is going to go to Busio. This guy's Alistair is ridiculous, and it's funny, it's not even one of the main champions I would consider for him throughout this year. FlyQuest themselves banned out all 3 of Busio's best champions across this year in Nico, Rakan, and Bard, the big 3 playmakers that he's been able to take over on, but this Alistair was just as deadly. They clearly felt comfortable going, B3 Alistair, pairing that up with something like Corki and, being able to really maximize the setup that this Wukong Annie already brought to you in the mid lane. As, we kind of break down drafts on this channel, you have this big dive comp coming in from VKS with the Jarvan, the Galio, the Kai'Sa, all of these things that are really good at being able to keep people locked in under tower or, being able to get onto backline members very consistently. But who are you actually diving on in this comp? Are you diving on Corki? Well, he has at least a good amount of self-peel. And outside of that, what? You're diving on Annie? Well, she's just going to full combo you and then you can kill her. It doesn't really matter. She's already done her job and everybody else is already probably winning the game for Fly. As long as you get any gold onto this Wukong, it's going to be a very, very big problem for VKS to be able to fight back from. And unless you have a super fed Kai'Sa that can basically just 1v9 in a lot of these team fights, the peel that you have, which is tremendous, by the way, just isn't really going to matter. You scale incredibly well, but it's so hard to imagine a world where you actually do get there. And that really was the issue. And that's what Busio took full advantage of here on the Alistair. Just constant engages, constant knockups, constantly good, aggressive plays being made by Busio. He's constantly in good positions. I think that is really the biggest positive that I can give him. Basically, every play he goes for is the correct play, and I really do mean it. Like, I think Busio has been on Inspired's level for most of the second half of this year. I know Inspired gets a lot of credit, and I do believe he is the best player in the West, but Busio deserves a ton of praise for just how strong he has been so far in the back half of 2025. This is not only a breakout year, this is like an MVP caliber year, best player, not only in the Americas, but in the West type of, performance that I think Busio is putting on. This is maybe not quite as good as Prime Core JJ, but like, we are like genuinely getting very close to being in that conversation for how good his year has been. Of course, his surrounding core is incredible. He's playing with a lot of very talented players, but again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this is the best support year in North American history, but it's certainly up there, and I think that there is a strong argument that it could be the best year in support history for Busio, depending on how the rest of the series goes, but at least here in Game 1, really solidifying that narrative. Masu was obviously phenomenal at being able to follow up on this. Typically, when you look at like a Wukong Annie comp, you're kind of, your eyes are directed towards the middle of the map, but because the Galio is there, it's really hard to take advantage of it in the way that maybe you would want. You want to try and, pick off a lot of these peel tools, things like the Jarvan and the Poppy as quickly as possible early on in the mid game here, and that's what Masu is here for, just absolutely blistering through this front line once FlyQuest is able to generate a gold lead. Those 12 kills were not by accident. They had that Corki in the right place at the right time for every single one of these fights, and the bot lane once again comes up clutch for Fly. Quad just played his best Annie game. This is a champion that I thought he was really bad at the start of the year. He just never really felt comfortable, never really looked comfortable on a champion like Annie. Not the case at all in this game. So much facilitation, a lot of really great plays. Bwipo and Inspired were obviously great. They both go deathless throughout this the entirety of game number 1, and they're like the frontline tanks. That's how you know you're doing something right. Fly was just better in every aspect. It was not difficult to see why. And then for Vivo Keatstars on the other side, dud of the game can go to quite a few people. Desamas was certainly in the conversation for me. I think Boal was in the conversation for me, but I'm going to give it to Trimby in the support position. As much as I want to praise him for that series against 100 Thieves where he was excellent, he goes on to the Poppy here in game number 1, and yikes, that did not work out. The Poppy was not relevant. A lot of times that champion wanted to just try to ult the right targets out, and there was just too much coming in from the other side. You were never able to land proper ultimates. Not a lot of spacing was going on. This should theoretically be a phenomenal game for Poppy support, and it just did not work out. Like, Trimby just couldn't really get the ball rolling. He was not useful in game 1, and he has to be useful. Again, him and Miru are the keys that kind of keep the cog rolling for VKS, and it just was not applicable in game number 1. Like I said, Boal, Desamas were both terrible. Miru could not play the game because his entire team was kind of running it down, and all the damage that he's supposed to play around his Galio is not there. I hate this draft in game number 1 for VKS because you need to get out to at least a competitive start, and putting Miru on a more facilitated pick, your best player in a series where you at the very least need to try in game number 1. It's just kind of an admission of defeat. You are never going to win a game against FlyQuest with this kind of draft because your team is just not built for it. There are a lot of teams out there that are. You are not one of them. So definitely a bit frustrated by that. The Kai'Sa was fine, I guess, but like never really got to play the game. This R5 Kai'Sa is supposed to dive in alongside the rest of the team when in reality, basically what was happening is that Fly controlled the whole map and they were just reacting to the aggressive plays that Fly were making. Sometimes Busio died because he was able to get 4-man knockups and the entire team would, kill everyone else and he would have to perish and it'd be a 5-for-1 or whatever. That's not good gameplay coming in from Morteus or coming in from VKS, and it's not bad gameplay from Busio. So it just is what it is. This series already feels like a bit of an afterthought in terms of how things are breaking down. We'll see if that carries forward. I think that there is a chance that VKS could do better with a different draft, perhaps something a bit more Miru-focused in the middle of the map, but the only way to know is to move on. If you go down 0-2, especially with how dominant this game number 1 was, yeah, I'm going to be a bit concerned. So a must-win for VKS, and certainly a series that FlyQuest now knows that they should be kind of dominating and not worrying about too much. So are Fly going to get that 2-0 lead, or will Vivo Keatstars be able to tie things up? Well, the winner of game number 2 was FlyQuest. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to go up in this series 2-0, and they are going to take full control of the direction that this best of 5 is headed in. Nobody's really surprised, especially after seeing game number 1 and just kind of knowing the history between these two teams that FlyQuest is kind of dominating them right now, but it is at least fun to see that Fly is living up to expectations. Last game was a sub 29 minute, 19-4 win, 17-4 win, something like that. This one is a sub 30 minute 18-5 win, and so at the very least FlyQuest is moving in a weaker direction as we go game by game. Next game, don't you know it, it'll be a sub 31 minute 17-6 game that FlyQuest will be able to take, and obviously that's progress. But jokes aside, like, this is just ridiculous at this point how consistent this team is. They're able to get so many quote-unquote pocket picks because they have so many pocket picks at this point that it's difficult to even ban them out. Once again, it's FlyQuest banning Busio's 3 best champions, Nico, Bard, and Rakan, and it just does not even matter. He just picks Leona on R5 and gets to play it with Masu's Senna, who he's like one of the best Sennas in the world. Genuinely, there are not a lot of players who play that champion as efficiently in team fights as he is capable of doing, because that's really his big strength. And now all of a sudden, despite the fact that you've banned out a ton of champions that your own individual team is good at, you're still on every comfort pick in the entire universe, and you're still able to run the entire map. Perhaps the 19th time that you try and engage on the Leona will work out if you're Vivo Keatstars. Unfortunately, was not working out in this one for them, so just kind of is what it is. They're completely outclassed in terms of the talent level on display here, and all of that credit in the world goes to Fly. Let's talk about it. Player of the game, once again, is going to go to Busio in the support position. What else do you even want me to say about this guy? I mean, he is actively obliterating these games. He is unfairly good at this level. Truly, he has ascended into not just being like an A- kind of player. He's like borderline A+, you know, must sign, you know, future of the entire league type of guy. Like, I've only given that A+ grade to a couple of players in the history of the LCS. Players like Bjergsen, players like Doublelift, you know, players like Blabber, I think at their absolute best were A+ caliber players. I mean, Inspired right now has kind of been that next player that's up in that mold, if you will. Busio could be right there next to him if he continues to play this way, because it just does not feel like there is any way to take advantage of his game plan and his playstyle. If you engage onto him, he's going to turn everything around and completely obliterate your team. And if you play safer and you will try to disengage and try to play, you know, a backpedaling type of game, Busio's engages are too good. He's going to be able to lock down priority targets super consistently, and you're not going to be able to win the fight there anyways. It's actually just absurd how game-breaking and game-warping his gameplay has been over the course of this year, but I cannot stress enough, this guy is making an argument for being the best player on FlyQuest. I get that Inspired gets all the headlines. Busio has been unreal, and I'm just hopeful that he's going to be able to keep it up going international, because this kind of support play is not normal coming out of the West. You're typically talking about teams that are built around mid lane, or built around jungle in particular, coming out of the West. You don't see support play like this all that regularly, and Busio has the chance to completely change that kind of reputation. Of course, you know, his lane partner in Masu is part of that as well. I called him one of the best Senna players in the world, and I stand by that. I think the gliding that this guy is able to do, the positioning this guy is able to do in a lot of the team fights that he plays is not normal. Even players in the East, trust me, I commentate the LPL, like, they don't play team fights in the way that Masu does. Now, he does still have problems in laning phase. He's not a perfect player. I wouldn't consider him an A+ kind of player or anything like that, but he certainly is incredibly valuable in the role that he holds, and if Busio is going to set him up in the way that he has been throughout this series, yeah, he's going to be more than good enough to be able to deliver on that kind of performance. Whippo just had his better game, I would say, here between this and game number 1. This Ambessa was really tough to take down. Of course, a lot of talk surrounding Whippo. I'm not really going to get into any of that, as you guys know, but he has come in here and even upgraded the team more than what we saw last time when these two teams played off against each other. Inspired, Quad, they were also good in the middle of the map, being able to take down this Xin Zhao Azir combo, which I get it. Trust me, I talked about Miru wanting to get on this hyper carry, and he did exactly that, but Xin Zhao was not the champion to try and facilitate an Azir Sivir game. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. And FlyQuest took more than advantage of that in the mid jungle. But really, it's a bot lane masterclass. It's a support masterclass right now going on for Fly, and VKS just do not have an answer. The gap in that support position is too large, and part of it is on Trimby, but really, like, what is this guy supposed to do in this series? Yes, he's done of the game for both game 1 and game 2, as we've already talked about, but, like, genuinely, what is he supposed to do when Busio is playing like this? Busio engages on him, and he dies, and the rest of his team dies, and they lose the fight. He engages on Busio, and he dies, and his entire team dies, and Busio wins the fight. Like, what is the play here? What are we even supposed to do? It just feels like he's constantly put in these terrible positions, and you can see it on Trimby's face. This guy is tilted out of his mind. I know Fly or Whippo, somebody came out and said, like, hey, you know, VKS has been 5-0ing us in scrim blocks, and I believe that. I believe that they said that because it's true, that FlyQuest was getting demolished by VKS in scrims. If they were destroying them in scrims, if VKS was one of these teams that was just, you know, dominating Fly because they were trying some off-meta stuff and they went 5-0 or whatever against this team, and then they get out on stage and in 5 games against them so far, they've lost all 5 and all 5 in absolutely dominant fashion, I'd be tilted too. Like, that would be something that would really affect my mental, so I'm not surprised to see Trimby really struggling. It is clear that he is just kind of off his game now. Desamis in the jungle, not good, man. Like, we were expecting this to be a bad matchup for VKS. It's just as bad as we could anticipate. This Xin Zhao was just worthless. I already don't like the Xin Zhao Azir combo. I think it kind of takes away a lot of the advantages of Xin Zhao in the jungle, but I think that was kind of taken to an extreme here. Morteus, I think, is playing quite bad. His positioning isn't very good, but again, how do you even play Sivir in this game? Miru is not stepping up. He needed to be the piece that was better than someone like Quad on the other side. He's doing nothing of the sort. He's getting shoved in, playing the Azir into Talia matchup and just losing. I hate this matchup. I hate leaving up Talia. I continue to believe this champion is undervalued by basically everybody in the world because she got nerfs and now her damage is a lot less. I don't care, man. Her kit is too good. She does everything at a high level, and Boal somehow wasn't the one that was, you know, actively running things down. VKS are just not on the same ballpark. Hopefully they can win one game here. They're going to get the chance to do it in game number 3. Who knows? FlyQuest can lose any game. Any team can lose any game, but right now Fly has full full control of this series, and I'm fully going into Game 3 expecting a 3-0 sweep. We'll see if VKS can stay alive and at least start their ideas for a reverse sweep here, or if Fly is going to shut the door and 6-0 their way to another championship. Well, the winner of game number 3 was Vivo Keydstars. They are going to take game number 3. They're going to stay alive in this series by at least, trying to get themselves on the board here. And I did not expect this to happen. Honestly, after the first 2 games, I thought they were going to roll over and die. They looked mentally tilted out of their minds on the cams in game number 2. And I just figured they didn't really have the talent to be able to keep up with a team like FlyQuest. But leave it to Fly to run it down in game number 3 and allow VKS another pathway back into this series. People are going to meme and joke about the fact that Fly dominated 100 Thieves in the finals in the way that they did, and here they are losing a game number 3 to Vivo Keydstars, and say that, this just goes to show where NA is at in terms of their depth. But we already knew that. I mean, VKS just beat 100 Thieves. They are the better team. I don't think a lot of people are really going to be arguing that right now. I wasn't even really arguing that going into this tournament. I think Vivo Keydstars are the second best team in the LTA in the Americas right now in terms of how things have broken down. But Fly still has control of this series for now. We'll see how that ends up breaking down throughout game number 4, but we can quickly talk about game 3 because there are some fun things to bring up for VKS that were not the case in the other 2 games in this series, I think, to put it lightly. First off, it happened. Miru had a phenomenal game and he completely outplayed Quad. Miru is going to get player of the game for me, although Desamas put in a phenomenal effort to try and steal that away from him early on in this on the Nocturne. Nocturne Akali did not fill me with confidence, I'll just say, in how this game was going to progress down the stretch. Not only was I worried about this mid-jungle duo, but honestly, I'm worried about this draft. Like, I really thought this was going to be a free win for FlyQuest. They have the Ezreal Karma duo that they've had so much success on throughout all of this year, that basically every team has had so much success on. They're very consistent as a bot lane duo. They have inspired on something like Skarner that can create a gigantic impact just on the map. Like, he can gank, he can, frontline, he can make plays. He can be that big playmaker for the team. He's very good at finding 3 or 4 man ultimates on Skarner typically, and he usually doesn't have terrible early games like he did here in game 3, which we'll talk about. You have Quad on something like Orianna that should be able to play safe for basically the entirety of the laning phase and then just be more useful than something like Akali as long as she doesn't have gold going into the later part of the game. And Bwipo on his most played all-time champion, although I think maybe not his most famous one, but the Renekton on the top side. That's basically every top laner's most played champion because he's been relevant for a decade now in pro play. But, Fly proved me wrong. They said, nope, this is the game that we are going to run down with this draft that is quite frankly a gigantic draft gap over Vivo Keydstars. But that's what makes it even more impressive that they were able to come out and really dominate this game. I mean, 22-2, like this was just as dominant as any win Fly got over them earlier on in the series. And all of that basically came through the early game, and it came through that mid-jungle duo. Desamas had an incredible early game, and this is kind of what I'm talking about here. If you wanted to give player of the game to this Nocturne, to Desamas for this game, I totally get it, because he massacred Inspired through the first 10 to 15 minutes of this game. This Skarner had absolutely nothing going on for him, and Desamas was constantly tracking him. He was constantly in the right place at the right time. This is easily the best game I've ever watched him play. Not to say that I'm like, eyeballing every single LTA South game in the same way that I am for the LTA North, but like I watched every single game he played in the playoffs as preparation, not only for Worlds, but for this tournament, and he didn't play like this in the playoffs. That I'm definitely telling you, and I know that this is a player that they're putting a lot of resources and hope and expectation into, quite frankly, because they have so much talent around him to be able to be that guy that can step up. And he at least had one game in a final series where he outplayed Inspired, and the fact that that's in there anywhere is already such an encouraging trait. Now, Fly did not go down quietly. They were attempting to try and make plays, but they were constantly pushed back, not only by the Nocturne, but by the Akali. Like I said, Miru is player of the game here for game number 3. This is the Miru we've been waiting for. This is the performance that I think a lot of people were just kind of hopeful that you were going to get in the finals, even if it wasn't going to be consistent. Akali has always been his best champion, going back to his time in Latin America, where we were really hyping him up as a player on this channel, last year, I believe it was. I want to say it was going into MSI last year, although I could be off on the timeline. But Miru has always been a player that's kind of been on my radar for these Akali type of performances, and boy, did he showcase that. This is not always the easiest matchup to play, because if Quad and Inspired played a little bit slower, they should just be able to scale. It shouldn't be that much of a problem for them to stay neutral and just be able to play out the rest of the game from there, but that is not what happened at all. Miru got a gigantic lead in the mid lane and ended up just completely breaking through in the back half of this game. That's why he's player of the game over Dasamis. I think Dasamis had a great early game, but Miru is really kind of the bow on top of the present here. That was the win in game number 3. Bilal going deathless was really good for this team in game number 3 on this Gnar. A lot of his engages were solid. I think Morteus and Trimby had a much better performance, but the fact that they did not need to win through the bot lane already says a lot, especially going into Ezreal Karma. So VKS, easily their best game they've played at this tournament. I think even including the 100 Thieves game, this was a dominant performance, and they did it against their highest level of competition so far. So big ups to VKS. I did not know they had this in them, but for Fly, must have just been one of those games that you weren't taking all that seriously. You had a great draft. You probably were feeling a little bit too over the moon after going 5-0 against VKS at the start of this tournament, and perhaps you just weren't all that worried about this. Inspired gets mega gapped in the early game here, and the game is not recoverable because Quad is running it down, because Busio is at times running it down here on the Karma, and everything just falls apart. Inspired is the obvious choice for dead of the game. I just think his early game was tremendously bad. If there is a knock against Inspired as a player, it's that his early games are not all that dynamic. He is definitely much more of a mid to late game player. Not that he's terrible in the early game. I think, there was a time in his career where he was kind of a bad early game player that kind of needed to ramp and play for team fights over time. I think he's a much better skirmisher now. He's certainly somebody who's a lot more aggressive with his pathing, and he is going to try and take resources away from enemy junglers. But if there is an area of Inspired's game to exploit, it is almost always going to be that early part of the game until he starts to get a lot of these items on him. He is one of the best 5v5 team fighters in the world, and so if you don't allow him to get to that stage, he can still be beaten in a lot of clean aspects. And that's kind of what we saw here, even by someone like Dasamis and Vivo Keedstars. You are able to take Inspired off his game. Part of it's mental, part of it is him just not locking in, but it is something that is at least worth noting. Quad had a terrible game. This is what I was talking about. Miru has the chance and the hands potential to outplay Quad for a game or two. It's really just about, can he do it for 3, and can the rest of the team step up in those instances? Well, he at the very least was able to do it for game number 3 here, which is massive. Quad needs to be better than this. There's not really much to say. He has games like this pretty frequently, so you just need to make sure that that doesn't happen all too much. Busio was also not very good, but I'm going to give him the biggest pass because he's been so dominant across the first 2 games. It's clear that this was just not one of those games, and you know what? They've dominated so much on Ezreal Karma in particular across this year that I definitely don't want to, hang this on Masu and Busio too much, because I have a feeling if you played this game, 9 times out of 10, it does not go like this. This just happened to be the one. And then Bwipo was on the top side on Renekton, and his entire team was kind of losing by that point. But Fly at least opening the door for VKS to be able to get back into this series, but I'm certainly not going to believe it until I see it. If VKS can win game number 4 and push us to a Silver Scrapes game number 5, then all of a sudden things get very, very interesting between these two teams. But for now, Fly still in control. Can they shut the door and prove that game 3 was an outlier, or are VKS going to showcase that they are much, much more dangerous and much more deadly than we gave them credit for? Well, the winner of game number 4 was FlyQuest. They are going to take game number 4. They are going to take this series 3-1, and they are going to prove that game 3 was just a blip on the radar, because they are going to pounce back in absolutely dominant fashion and take this series really without too much problem. Credit to VKS, credit to Vivo Keedstars, because they were really excellent in this series. They did a ton of things that I didn't expect. Game number 3, not something that I anticipated. I didn't expect Dasamis to have a great early game on the Nocturne, and for Miru to be able to take over on the Akali. I thought they were going to get 3-0 swept aside, just like everybody else that's gone up against FlyQuest, but they put up at least a little bit of a fight. But in these losses, man, it is clear who the best team in the LTA is. And quite frankly, I know this is going to upset a lot of European fans. It's quite clear who the best team in the West is. I don't even think they're on the same tier right now. And I know that that's a controversial statement. I got a lot of comments, and I guess I'm addressing this here in the LTA video. I don't know how many people who watch the LEC one also watch this one. I got a lot of comments telling me that, like, oh, you are underestimating these teams. Like, how can you say that 2024 G2 is better than 2025 G2? Or how can you say that the region itself is, weaker than it's been in a while? Like, what are you watching? I don't know, man. Like, to me, top 8 is hard enough to get into, and I don't think G2 are close to what this FlyQuest team is right now in terms of my expectation. If there is one spot for a Western team, which there isn't always, but if there is going to be one spot for a Western team, my money's on Fly right now in terms of how these are breaking down. Obviously, we'll talk about that more when we get into Worlds coverage, going into that tournament, but it just goes to show how high I am on this team and what they're capable of doing, because when they play their own style, when they do the things that they are good at, they are not beatable by a lot of teams, especially in the West, and we've seen that regularly. So let's talk about it. Busio for me is player of the game, and obviously he's going to be my finals MVP. There is no argument, there is no discussion. There's not a single other player on this team that was even in consideration for finals MVP other than Busio. This was his series to run and to dominate. All three of their wins you can attribute to him. He finally got one of his own best picks because they allowed it on his side. They left up both the Rakan and the Bard and said, pick, take your pick. We'll take the other one. It does not matter, which one you take. We will be comfortable in the other matchup. And they left up the Bard, and that's exactly what Busio went for. This guy is just unreal on this champion. It's actually just a highlight reel over and over and over again when he gets to play it. He's such a dynamic playmaker, and he's so consistent at being able to pilot and operate this champion in team fights. It's just really fun to watch him play Bard. He does everything at such a high level. And again, I've already glazed Busio so much over the course of this, but this guy's just unplayable against when he's at his absolute best. Like, I genuinely think he has an argument for being like a top 7 or 8 support in the world when he's at his best. I'm not saying he's consistently always there. Some people are going to see that and call it sacrilege, but I haven't seen anything else from Busio over the course of this year other than that kind of statement. He's even shown up internationally, so I feel pretty good about Busio. And the other player who was honestly terrific in this series, as little as people want to talk about it, is Whippo in the top lane. Game 2, Game 4, he really ended up stepping up in both of those games and made a gigantic impact. This was his best game of the series on Urgot. I considered giving him player of the game because this Urgot was unstoppable on R5. This is kind of a signature champion of his, but Busio's Bard was excellent, and I think it really caps off the finals MVP performance that he ended up giving. But Whippo was great, and if you want to give him player of the game, I'm certainly not going to argue that for Game 4. It was massive for this team. Quad and Masu were excellent in this series. Masu had an incredible series. His positioning was just phenomenal, and that's really the thing he does at an elite level. He's not a perfect player. He does have his own flaws, but his teamfight positioning, his in-lane positioning, like his ability to position as an AD carry is his elite quality, I think is the way that I want to try and, say that. It's why we've always considered him such an elite caliber prospect, because if he can lock in on everything else, he's got the hard part done. He knows how to, click around. His positioning is never going to be the biggest problem when it comes to Masu, except when he's one pixel out of a brush at MSI. Jokes aside, Inspired was much better here on the Maokai, was able to slow the pace of the game down a lot more efficiently because he's playing a champion that's a little bit more invested into that kind of playstyle. But it's Fly, right? Like, of course they're going to dominate this series. This was probably the most competitive of their wins, and yet it was still very much in their favor. They controlled basically every aspect of the game. Fly's just awesome, and when they get to do their own thing, they look like one of the best teams in the world. For Vivo Keydstars, this is not like the worst series of all time. They actually had some avenues out of this game number 4. I think Miru was fine in the mid lane. He wasn't exceptional, but he wasn't bad. I thought Morteus had a great game here on the Unara. I get that this champion is a little bit busted. She's always going to be pretty strong in pro play, but Morteus, I thought, piloted it crazy well, and he had the chance to basically have this 1v9 hero type of moment at the end of this game, and it just barely wasn't there. If he had a little bit more gold, perhaps he could have pulled it off. I want to give a lot of credit to these young players that maybe a lot of international fans don't know about. Again, having watched all of the LTA South playoffs, I'm not going to pretend to be the biggest LTA South expert on the planet. There are a lot of people that are going to be able to go in depth on this more than I will. But these players are really good. Morteus' mechanics are really solid, and Trimby and Miru are very experienced, very versatile players that can function in a lot of different scenarios. Like, there is talent on this team that they can use. Desamas looked great in game number 3. Now, was he able to hold up in the other games? Not so much. The Viego was kind of a takeaway here from FlyQuest. Did not end up working out. Not really a takeaway. Maokai was already showing, but the Viego not working out. And then Boal is going to get out of the game for game 4. He is a weak link of this team. He's just not all that good, mechanically speaking. He has a ton of flaws. He's not great in lane. I think going up against international top laners is not going to be a good deal for Vivo Keydstars and for Boal, but I think there is talent elsewhere on this team, and sometimes that's enough to be able to at least be competitive. I'm not ruling out the fact that this team can go up against a Fnatic or a Movistar Koi and at least hold their own. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to be able to beat teams like that consistently, because I don't necessarily believe that. We'll get into that when we get into Worlds coverage, but do I believe that this team is a pushover going to the World Championships? No, I think they've more than earned their spot at Worlds as the number 2 seed here, and I hope that they're going to be able to at least put up a fight against a lot of the other Western teams that are kind of lower on down in the totem pole. But it is a one-team region, that is absolutely for sure. When you're talking about teams that can be competitive, that can try to make the quarterfinals and at best even the semifinals in the right matchup, it is FlyQuest world, and we are just living in it. I'm so high on this roster and on this team and the way they play the map and the mechanical skill that these players have. I think they have multiple different styles. They're aggressive. They are good playmakers. They constantly make the right decisions on the map. map. This is a very complete team in a lot of different aspects of the game, and honestly, I'm at the point where I'm just pitching my full wagon on them. I really went in on them for MSI, and I was at least kind of proven right. I think they might be even better than that going to Worlds, and that is a scary proposition. All right, but that is going to do it for my LTA Finals overview and analysis video, as well as the semifinals. Let's not gloss over the fact that we did that at the start of the video. And that's going to do it for my LTA coverage in 2025, and that's going to do it for my regional coverage, my domestic coverage for every league in 2025. There are only big tournaments left. Worlds, obviously, we're going to be covering ASI on this channel, which is going to be a lot of fun. You know, spoilers, at least a little bit, but you might be seeing a little bit more of me for ASI than for, you know, some other things as well. I'll talk about that more when I have some information, but at least stick around for some more ASI announcements. And then, of course, we're going to be covering the LTA promotion tournament as well, kind of seeing who gets that next spot, whether Disguised is going to be able to fight their way back in, or whether one of the teams from either the NACL or the LRN are going to be able to push their way into that guest spot. We're going to be covering all of that on the channel, but congratulations to Fly, congratulations to Vivo Keatstars, and even to 100 Thieves. They're the 3 teams that will be going to Worlds to represent the LTA. Very exciting stuff. Do I think that, you know, seeds 2 and 3 are very strong? Probably not. They're probably 2 of the weaker teams at the entire tournament, but I do think there is room for upsets at this tournament in terms of the consistency of a lot of these teams in Fearless. And, you know, if they can get past that best of 1 stage, get into those best of 3s and start really pushing forward, perhaps we could see something a little different. As for FlyQuest, their aspirations are no less than, at the bare minimum, what they were capable of doing last year, because this team is significantly better than they were last year. Honestly, their goal should be semifinals. I don't know how reasonable that is. I don't think they're going to achieve that. This is not a top 4 team in the world, but, you know, you get the right draw, you show up on the right day, perhaps you win a series, you can shock the world. Bare minimum, this team needs to get out of Swiss. There is no way that the expectation should be set lower than that. If this team is not in the top 8 at Worlds, it will be considered a disappointment. But let me know if you agree or disagree with that takedown in the comment section below. I get that the region is not very strong right now, but this team looks so complete in terms of their gameplay, and I'm really not sure we're going to see a better North American team for a long time. But that's going to do it. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we're going to be covering, you know, like I said, Worlds and ASI and all of this stuff on the channel, so you'll want to be around for that. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. Hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all